Good afternoon, House. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's incredible to see your interest and so many people in here. Before I start the panel, I want you to take a second and think of the next decade, which one disease you hope will no longer exist. And when I think about this question, it immediately becomes personal. And for me, the answer is clearly cardiovascular diseases. But keep your answer in your head, because this is the very question which I'll ask all my panelists today towards the end of our discussion, and really intrigued to see what the answers would be. I'm Nikita Popov. I'm really privileged to have this amazing panel with me today, which has incredible combination of perspectives. Fiona with a very practical perspective on what it really takes to deliver medicines to patients. Nubar with investor view, portfolio view. Colin with founder view and deep biology expert. And Aldo with perspective on cutting-edge foundational models in healthcare. So let's start quickly. I have a lot of questions, a lot of topics to discuss. And the first round would be the lightning round. So answer in 45 seconds. 2025, if you was to summarize this in 45 seconds, then what really changed your reality, one thing? And what is this bottleneck that still didn't move and you wished it? Fiona, maybe I start with you.
Okay, so I'm going to go straight into chemistry itself, medicinal chemistry. That's how we design small molecule drugs. What I really saw happening was generative chemistry had the potential to replace medicinal chemistry in a real program. This is a real life program. And what I found really interesting is a medicinal chemist tends to make incremental steps to get from one molecule to another area of chemical space. And AI actually leaps from one place to another and takes a big step. And that's a surprise to the chemists, but then they find out that actually that big step can take you to a much better chemical place. So that was my sort of learning and excitement for 2025. I think the barriers are still the people who don't quite believe in it. And if I take chemistry, we're getting more and more people now using the AI tools, but they still want to do the old way of doing all the iterative compounds as well at the same time.
Interesting. Nubar, does this resonate? What's your takeaways from 25?
I think that we're beginning to see in one of our projects, Lila, the first signs of autonomous scientific discovery, and particularly, let's say, in the optimization space, rather than using generative AI, as we've done for many years now, to design proteins and other larger molecules, the ability for these systems to essentially kind of almost play against themselves with different algorithms and make, as Fiona mentioned, leaps that are quite a bit beyond our comprehension. And then when you actually make these things and you see the data, for example, expressing 500x more protein off of a piece of mRNA than's ever been shown, having mRNA last 14 days instead of half a day. These are things for which we really have no explanation, and any more than we have explanation for the chess strategies that are used when computers play each other. And we've talked a long time about whether you could think about scientific approaches as a game, meaning in a competitive, a conflicting kind of way, in a game-winning way, and we're seeing signs of that, quite impressive early signs of that.
Fantastic, yeah. Aldo, what about you? One thing that really impressed you, one thing you hope moved?
So what impressed us was actually the results that my team got that we published in two Nature papers on really the next generation of digital biomarkers, where the AI extracts the way of measuring disease progression that really accelerates and de-risks drug development, because that's where most of the compounds that come after drug discovery fail, 95%.
Yeah.
And if we pair AI drug discovery with AI drug development and clinical trials guided by AI, we can really increase the throughput and tackle many rare diseases. And where I agree with you on that, I think the biggest limit is not medical, it's not technical, it's not legal, it's sociological.
Very interesting. So we have two agreements on the bottlenecks. Colin.
So I think in 2025, generative causal AI started to reveal really novel human biology for some of the first times. And we saw some interesting discoveries and validations in Huntington's disease, where it's now something a human researcher couldn't have come up with. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg and what's going to really break open our field. What didn't move so well, I think, you still have the same bottlenecks in terms of clinical validation, and therefore the perception of these machine-driven discoveries. I think the value and the acceptance is going to still be held back until we find ways to short-circuit that piece.
Excellent. Thank you so much for great answers. So let's move. So I think no doubts AI as a completely peak hype now. So I would love to discuss what is real and what is hype. Maybe starting with you, Fiona, you explained how Novartis is using AI across the whole drug discovery value chain. So can you give us one example where AI delivered tangible outcome or tangible decision that changed the course of research?
Yeah, so I think the area that I am most excited about, which Colin was alluding to earlier, is really tapping into new biology and helping us to really deeply understand diseases and forming hypotheses that allow us to then discover new drugs. Because there are still so many diseases that we don't understand, we haven't got treatments for. And so an area we're particularly interested in at Novartis at the moment is kidney disease. It's really a growing concern. I mean, it's often associated with cardiovascular disease, as you know, and it ranges from chronic kidney disease, which can be a cardiovascular disease, through to rarer inherited diseases. One disease that we've been working on is the most common genetic inherited disease, which is ADPKD, which forms cysts within the kidney, and these grow over time. And eventually, you actually have to have a kidney transplant or go on to dialysis. So it's really quite a devastating disease. And some of the genetics has been known, but it's also been very difficult to think of how to treat that disease. And what we're trying to do now is form very good cellular models to test hypothesis in. So it's all very well having the AI system to predict things, but how do you then build the validation of that? You still need a biology lab in the loop, as we call it. And so we developed a human organoid system. So we were able to get cells from patients with ADPKD, and if you grow these in the laboratory, they actually form very sort of kidney-like layers, and then they develop the cysts, exactly as in the human disease. So what we then did was build models of the pathways within the kidney and probe this using AI and foundational models, gene transformer models, and it identified a number of targets that had not been considered before. And we then prioritized those, again, using further AI analysis, and got down to, we've now got 5 hits that we actually have been validated in that ADPKD model. So they actually did show efficacy, and we can go in and use things like CRISPR to knock out the genes that are identified. So those are now going forward into our portfolio of renal disease.
Excellent
project.
example, Fiona. Thank you. And what is one thing that looked promising but did not deliver in the end?
Well, I mean, I'm still curious about where is it worth doing AI versus the old ways actually may still be easier or even cheaper. And if you just want to make a regular monoclonal antibody, you can now do that with generative tools, but it turns out that the computer costs for that are actually 10 times higher than the $100 it takes to go and get a monoclonal antibody made by conventional mouse hybridoma technology. So it might save you time, and it all sounds very cool, but sometimes, is AI actually solving for a problem that you have? Or is it you're just doing it because it's AI? And so now I'm actually more aggressive at probing my team, what is the real benefit here? And is it going to save us money? Is it going to do something we could not do before? And so where are you going to use it? And let's get AI focused on where we're doing things we couldn't do before. That's where I get most excited about it.
Yeah, excellent. Fully agree. Let's focus and let's not do AI for the sake of AI. Let's do this for discovery. that you alluded earlier to. Colin, maybe moving to you. So one of the biggest bottlenecks that we have is that we fundamentally do not understand biology to the extent that we would love to. And there are different estimates from 5 to 10%, really small number. So can you tell us example where AI actually helped us understand biology better?
Yeah, so I think what you touched on is, I think, the biggest impediment to AI really transforming drug discovery and development is the lack of understanding we have today after 89 years of molecular biology research. The fact that we only know 5% of the circuitry of human disease means 95% is hidden, which makes the drug discovery and development process so limited. So the big opportunity here is the fact that we now have multi-omic data we can generate directly from humans, not animal models, not cell lines, directly from human tissue at scale. That means DNA sequence variation, gene expression, proteomics, coupled with clinical outcomes, such that now these causal AI methods can start to reconstruct and reverse engineer this hidden 95% of the circuitry, enabling in silico experiments. Now, with a more complete wiring diagram that engineers, computer chip engineers take for granted, we can now start doing these same kind of in silico perturbations in these human-derived models. To make it concrete, Huntington's disease is a horrible neurodegenerative disease that, depending on the number of repeats of a certain triplet of nucleotides people are born with, they're guaranteed to get this disease that causes them to lose motor control and causes cognitive decline and early death. Now, for many years, it was believed just to be a matter of knocking down this mutant protein, Huntington. But it turns out there's other mechanisms at play, and using real-world data from our partners at the Cure Huntington's Disease Initiative, the causal AI technology was able to reverse engineer Gemini digital twins that led to the discovery of a completely novel target impacting what's called mismatch repair. Because people born with the disease don't actually manifest the disease until they get to be in their 20s or 30s, and the number of these CAG repeats starts to increase. It starts to then, it keeps on going up until it gets to be over 100 of these repeats, and that's when it becomes pathological. So we discovered a completely novel intervention point that did validate in the wet lab. The publication will be coming out this quarter, and it's different than what the human researchers have already been looking at around MSH3 and PMS1. And so I think it's an example of where these models are going beyond what human experts can do. And we're going to see more and more of that because these systems are just way too complex for the smartest humans to figure out what's the intervention point of thousands and tens of thousands of interacting components, genes and proteins driving clinical outcomes. We desperately need these types of tools to get us there faster, or we're going to be having the same conversation in 1,000 years.
Yeah. Excellent, Colin, and I think also highlights importance of wet lab validation, because AI can give you quite quickly some advice or pattern, but then given how high a stakes, we need to validate this in the lab, very important. Nawar, so how does this discussion resonate with you from investor standpoint, and where do you see most value currently being created when it comes to AI, and what are the areas which for you would be overhyped?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I'm not a really good representative investor because we have 45 companies and the science for all those companies are generated by our labs. And so we're much more a scientific engine with a lot of money to deploy. So we invest in the things that we create. But let me tell you, kind of across about 15 different of our companies that are entirely based on AI now and starting 7 years ago, what the frontier from small molecules all the way to LNP design and everything in between is telling us. And that is that this discussion is, in fact, sociological, as Aldo said, or you can call it sociological if you want, which is very much a human-centric discussion. And I get it that we humans control the resources, and so we're going to deploy them in a way that essentially validates how we've always done things. But there is a possibility, and I agree with Colin's view, that the problem, and I believe this very strongly, is actually with humans, because our comprehension, our language, our idea of understanding is actually pretty limited and very, very small in the number of variables we can even talk about. I mean, imagine a paper that would try to describe a mechanism that involves 1,000 things interacting with 100 other things. Just imagine the publication of that paper however many months or years from now. How many pages is that going to be? Who's going to read it? And yet, models already can be developed that can begin to emulate all known data about a particular cell under a particular set of circumstances that involves that many parameters. So let me just kind of tell you, and again, I may be dead wrong 5 years from now, we can all come back and you can laugh at it, but I think we're going to have to make way for the possibility that nature itself is multiple forms of intelligence. Now we have 3 forms of intelligence: human intelligence, machine intelligence, AI, and nature's intelligence. And in biology, we generally never considered a cell an intelligent system. In fact, since we made up words, we always considered humans as the only intelligent thing on the planet. For those of you who are interested in this topic, you should read a very recent study showing, particularly in a very well-controlled experiment, chimps doing Bayesian reasoning. Absolute conditional adjustment of weightings on decision-making they're making. And it's an offense to humans who own intelligence. Why I'm saying all this is, I think it's time we start thinking about everything we're studying in living systems as forms of intelligence. The notion that a virus could take down billions of people's immune systems and just about do so successfully, but for a human technology intervention, not an immune system intervention, is quite remarkable. If that virus was a computer virus, boy, would there be AI tents here talking about that computer virus and how intelligent it was. It is just as intelligent as anything that computers have made. The reason I'm saying all that is that form of intelligence. So this is my prediction for the future. It's a grim one, but it's a useful one. I think humans are going to look at nature the way we have for thousands of years, with great fascination and trying to pick away at little pieces like Huntington's, even with a few more mechanisms, and then say, we really don't understand this. Now we're looking at AI and saying, we really don't understand this. And I would say, why not assume we're not going to? But with technology and enough data, we can emulate, influence, and direct positive outcomes from that same nature. When it comes to climate adaptation, when it comes to disease, prevention, early detection, treatment, cure, all of that is available if we take our ego out of it. That's why I think technologists have to make room. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, we're a regulated industry. The regulator wants to know a target. How many drugs have been developed over the last century for which we had no target? And when we found the target, it turned out there was 5 other things going on. All that didn't stop us from treating people. And now I think we're going to have probably, in my view, many more things that we're not going to, from a human understanding standpoint, be able to definitively put our stamp on, but they're going to be useful for human lives. Are we really going to say, let's only put our money into things we understand? I think the world's going to bifurcate. And if resources go to people who are interested in the outcome, not the command of the understanding, the other category, whether it's in China or it's anywhere else in the world, is going to dominate over our paradigm, which is very human, molecular, reductionist centric.
Excellent. Thank you, Noubar. And I think it's a wonderful segue to you, Aldo, as you're working on building this novel foundational model in health. So how does this resonate? Do you think in a similar way as you are working on this project? And where have you seen the most real application of this work?
Yeah, so we launched Nightingale AI, named after Florence Nightingale, to be really the first large health model, right? You know language models? That's basically a writer writing text. It's not a medical doctor, right? Get a writer to read a medical textbook, and then they answer questions about medicine as if they've read a textbook. We want an engine that reasons over medical data, not language. And so it's multimodal. We can read in healthcare records. Of course, at Imperial College, we have Northwest London and all of London, the infrastructure. So we're talking 10 million patient records. We're talking to the UK Biobank to get genetic information. So we can really think about building a true holistic foundation model that ingests this information. And so we started that in March. We received 1 million GPU hours on the 11th largest supercomputer by the UK government. So we're a sovereign AI flagship of the British government. And we've just finished the training run. Papers are coming. But I think the most exciting thing is now that we can take this intelligence that can, say, you have a chest infection, and you can ask it, if I take this antibiotic, how's my X-ray next week going to look like? That's the level of medical reasoning you can do. And we are now having launched a pilot project where we're now scanning all of Northwest London patient data with cradle-to-grave data, all primary, all secondary care data, to identify repurposable drugs of which we don't know that they work. Now, Viagra was not meant for reproductive success. It's meant for something else, cardiovascular. And we're just trying these pilots where we have this engine reasoning about where is the trajectory of this patient going? Is that what you would expect? Or is there a certain unknown benefit? And we've just started running the models now to see what we can uncover from there. So it's not drug discovery, but it's drug depurposing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aldo. I hope it was helpful. Now we know what's real, what's a bit overhyped. I suggest that we switch a bit to the forward-looking view. So as you think about 2026, where we are now, and next 12 to 18 months, let's start with, again, very quick question. So if you was to pick one, better models, better data, lab automation, then what do you think would drive the most progress in the next 12 to 18 months? And here comes the trick. You are not allowed to say all of the above. You need to choose. Colin, maybe with you.
I think the marriage of large language models with causal AI-driven models are really going to drive the breakthrough. We do need the causal structures, the mechanisms, but we are also at a point where LLM-driven foundation models can really drive much better inputs, much better priors. And it's a given that the multi-omic patient data is going to be getting exponentially better that will feed these models.
Okay, but I still take it as models, not data, because you mentioned both. And that's against the rules.
Correct, yes. Models.
Fiona, does it resonate, or you have another perspective?
I'd go with data as my pick, but actually I'll be more specific than that, clinical data. And when I say clinical data, I mean data taken from patients, whether that's biomarker data or phenotypic data, health record data, all of the data that you get from clinical trials. And we are fortunate at Novartis that we put a lot of effort into compiling a database, working with Palantir actually, that is a deep searchable database that has all of our historical clinical trial data in it, very well annotated, and in a form that we can now, we have applications for AI to search very smart searches within that clinical data. But that's just Novartis's data. I mean, we've still got 1 million patients in that database, but that's still nowhere near enough, and it's only the diseases we've worked in. And what we need is a lot more data like that can be searched and also shared. I mean, the more we can share data, I think the better place that we're all in to solve some of these really difficult problems.
Excellent. So we have one for models, one for data, Nubar.
I would also side with data, but with a slightly kind of broader interpretation of data. When you're training these models, at least in the LLM world, there's this notion of tokens, and people have estimated it takes about 15 trillion tokens from internet-derived words and images to train these models these days. We have an effort, without necessarily being able to understand how we're going to validate or justify it, to create as many new data tokens from biology as we can through autonomous labs. And we, last week at JP Morgan, kind of began to share, at least privately, although it's not a big secret, that we believe we have about 1 trillion tokens of data, much of it new, and that by the end of this year we may exceed 10 trillion or more. And we are training models around that. What we are finding preliminarily is that what the predictions that are being made, I won't say if they're more accurate or not, but I probably wouldn't be mentioning if they weren't, are certainly different than what the word-trained, paper-based trained models are suggesting.
Excellent, yeah. Aldo?
It's not C, because we work on operational data as it falls out every day in the healthcare system. It's not B, so we don't need more data, because we're in the UK, best place to digital health research. And it's number one, we need better models because we need models that can really integrate information from environmental, healthcare, all the way to molecular and genetic data. And for that, we need to have an increase in intelligence that's about how we reason.
Excellent, excellent. So it seems we have a tie on models versus data. That's good. Nabar, maybe my next question to you as well. So you mentioned earlier polyintelligence, autonomous labs. What are some maybe non-obvious blockers that actually prevent us from moving as fast as you would wish to? Is it biology? Is it economics? Is it something else?
You know, I think, well, I couldn't agree more. You know, I've met Aldo before, but I couldn't agree more. It's just humans. I mean, I think we are supremely confident with the way we think and we operate, and so we impose on these things that we are imposed with, which is organized skepticism, otherwise known as science. So scientists basically doubt what everybody else says, and so why not? We also doubt what any computer model says. Scientists had a great day when the word hallucination was invented to describe LLMs because it validated why they think every other scientist hallucinates, other than them. I'm only partly joking. I've been involved in scientific discovery for 39 years now, and I would say that while we should not take the human out of the loop, the human has to at least adjust to the loop. And it cannot be a human-subjugated loop, because when it was humans and no measurement systems, we had one version of medicine. Then we started making measurement systems, except it was really, really bad and slow. Then we invented computers, and then they got a lot better. Then communications, they got a lot better. Then the internet got a lot better because everybody could get access. And now we have nothing short of a prosthesis to human reasoning and acquisition of data at a massive scale. And yet we insist we do science in exactly the same way. So I mean, I cannot repeat it enough. At least plan for the date over the next decade or two where each of you will have to come across the chasm of saying, wait a minute, why don't I act smarter as human intelligence by leveraging my machine intelligence and nature's intelligence to make humans' lives better? And if we could just make room for that, that's what I call polyintelligence is the juxtaposition of human nature and machine. And if we could just kind of coexist and cooperate, literally, instead of these things be subjugated to human control. I don't know, it may sound like Pollyannish, and you might think that this, but I think it's inevitable. It's just a question of how long. So the block is that people don't generally want to believe it. I'll say one thing. I just came, as I'm sure others here, Fiona, I know I saw in San Francisco at JP Morgan. I can tell you one thing. You know, Dario Amodei, Jensen Huang, all of these guys are at the healthcare conference of JP Morgan for the first time that I've seen. And all they want to talk about is how AI can transform life science. That they have found the gold mine for what they want, which is a field in which data is both rapidly growing because of automation, vitally important to their customers because it affects their health, a desert of prior innovation, at least the way they look at it from a tech stack standpoint. What they don't know is what to do with it, biology, chemistry. So rightly, they're partnering with large pharma companies, they're partnering with groups like ourselves and startups. But I can tell you that the tech side of this field is actually gonna challenge the scientific kind of stagnation, again, in thought. And sorry, I'm not being critical, I'm criticizing myself. And so we're gonna be almost forced into this reckoning. That's my
excellent. Yeah.
But it is people's reluctance to think there's another way.
Fiona, I think this will resonate with you, especially as you are building a new research facility in San Diego. So what are some AI tools that you would want to embed from day one? And then what are some maybe that you think are not ready or you are not willing to adopt?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk of the lab of the future. And do we have that now or when in the future? And to what extent is that automated, autonomous, or humanoid robots? I mean, there are all these different mixtures that we are looking into, and I think all of these are worth consideration. But, you know, for me, I think of making a drug as being more like making a Formula One Ferrari than having a high throughput factory of churning out, I don't know, Ford cars. And what worries me about the AI field, and especially the tech guys who don't really understand biology and medicine, they think it's all about high throughput. And doing things at big scale is going to be the answer. Now, we tried this multiple times in the past. You will know this, being same as me, 40 years in the industry. When we moved to high throughput screening, or even ultra high throughput screening, and everything was miniaturized, it didn't solve any problems at all. It actually made it worse because we had no clue what we were doing with all the data. And we collected a lot of data that was useless. And when we went back to much more focused, really understanding what we were doing, and we did targeted screening, we got a lot more out of it. And so I think we've got to be very smart about what data we should be collecting, and don't just collect all data for the sake of it, but get the right types of data sets to do the right types of experiments. And I think that still, to me, also needs humans in that loop to be really adding to the capabilities.
That's excellent examples. And Colin, I see you nodding. I'm about to come to you. Because when we build these LLMs, right, in our field, we build them on biological data, which we do not fully understand, as we discussed, right? So when you think about next year, 1.5 years, then what for you would really be this breakthrough in this area?
Yeah, I think it does start with some of what Fiona was describing in terms of the need still for humans to think about the physics of the problem and the question versus just jumping into the data collection and the application of this technology. I've certainly seen a lot of that, of technologists jumping in with the tools, the data, not being very clear on what question they're asking. Like, this is science, right? AI applied to science is what's going to really matter. And I do think the role that we're going to have here is really being able to develop tools that can start to really reverse engineer this unknown biology. And I think we're finally at a tipping point where there's sufficient quantities of data straight from patients. So data is still sort of number one, but I do think we're at a stage now where we have enough compute power, we have powerful enough multiple types of AI. Large language models have their place. I actually don't think it's the right framework for solving the core fundamental scientific problems in our field. And so I think what we're going to start to see breakthrough-wise this year are models being generated from this data that can be cross-validated in other human-based systems and rapidly turn into new therapeutics with hopefully a way to close the loop faster on phase 2 evidence.
Yeah. Aldo, you heard this perspective, so let's travel to Davos 2027. So what would convince you that the real progress was done by that point?
I think we will see probably the first AI-generated targeted trials with very selective patient populations out of large population data sets that will give you that advantage. I hope we will also see AI systems that don't ignore 150 years of human science and are not just data-driven, but are able to integrate human knowledge and inference to formulate new drugs. Think about AMR space, of course, cancer space, and see them coming into trials at a much faster pace. And I think the most exciting thing that I think is cloud-based labs, that you can run a innovation group, a biotech company, without having any lab spaces if you find the equivalent of the hyperscalers in the molecular biology space. And I hope we will see more of these by 2027.
But I think we all will agree that none of the parties will be able to do that alone. We really need to have partnership and right collaboration model to go after this. What I believe are the most meaningful applications of this technology, but also one of the most difficult problems to crack. Fiona, you are partnering a lot with companies like Isomorphic, Generate. What are your key learnings? How to make these partnerships really successful?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think no one company can tackle this on their own, especially with such fast-moving technology developments. And so, I sort of made the guidance to my team that we look at each of the steps along the drug discovery process. We don't just find one solution to this, let alone an enterprise solution across the whole of Novartis. I mean, that was never going to have the same solution for commercial as discovering new targets. So who are the people that are most interested in developing technology for chemistry or for predictive safety, for clinical trials, and then form partnerships with those companies, especially the ones that are really trying to be really innovative and change how we're doing things. So that's how we've come up with the partnerships we have, like isomorphic in the protein folding and drug design space, and generate bio in the biologic space, and we do have ones in the predictive safety. And so, but also I don't want to just be stuck with those companies because I think it does move so quickly. So a technology that's here and now this year is going to be very quickly out of date. And also what's interesting is how much is actually put into the open AI and comes out of universities. Some of the best models are coming out of universities and are openly available. So, that makes it a difficult business model for some of the biotech companies that are setting up models, because we often find that, why would we sign up to this? And then we can find there's, things that are generally available. So it's interesting to see how the whole sort of ecosystem develops. But even when we work with the tech companies, again, it's just as you said, they don't have all of the pieces of what it takes to make a medicine. And this is why a partnership, and ideally, partnerships that involve academia, working with biotech, working with pharma, and then ultimately the regulators, because we can do a lot now to speed up clinical trials, use biomarkers, and accelerate with digital twins for clinical studies. But we have to get buy-in from regulators to actually agree that we can have a virtual arm on our trial.
Absolutely.
And they're not yet, or that we can use predictive safety instead of animal models. We'd love to do that. Actually, the regulators, FDA, are quite interested in how we can do that.
Yeah, so, I think this is really one piece that we also need to have on the panel, maybe next year. Noubar, across portfolio of your companies, what are the patterns that you see that make partnerships successful, and maybe what are some less productive collaboration models?
So I definitely think that innovation, which is the lifeblood of the pharmaceutical industry, it should be thought of as a supply chain, and much like companies very commonly think about their material supply chains. And the whole idea of a supply chain is interdependency. That is, having long enough relationships with people that they do stuff for you they wouldn't otherwise just do by a fee-for-service, and you in turn represent to them a stable signal to what to innovate around. That's proven very hard in this industry because people want optionality. And of course, the pharmaceutical companies themselves are valued generally mostly based on their late-stage programs, almost zero on their early-stage programs, and for sure zero or negative in the preclinical programs, simply because people see the money going out the door and they don't believe anything will come out of it, unfortunately. So as a result, when they come to doing partnerships, it takes leadership, the way Fiona and many others have shown, to actually say, no, wait a minute, even if we can't point to this partnership and say how it's going to build the drug for this, still, we need to build out this, at least a loose notion of a supply chain of innovation. So I would hope that a more mature industry would eventually find its way to that. I'd say probably right now, 95% of business development is acquiring post-proof of concept assets, and 5% in this exploratory mode. Historically in biotech, most innovation has advanced through these partnerships, but I'm a little worried that we're entering a phase where it's very transactional and it's very asset specific, especially at a time when you see the rise of Chinese innovation in this space, very much asset centric and very much driven to fill that demand, which is show me human proof of concept and I'll do a deal. So they've built a whole model to do that. I don't know how American companies compete with that. If you can put something in the clinic much more quickly, if you can get access to data that American companies generally can't get access to train models, that's a pretty scary proposition. So I would say supply chains, alignment, but also, kind of the willingness of the incumbents to create a mutualistic relationship so that as people get better at what they do, they can add more value. These kind of starts and stops, I do think, aren't very useful for value. And look, the other thing is, if you didn't ask, but I'll predict something. I actually think it's going to take somebody to go soup to nuts for anybody to believe this. Because ultimately people will kill it with doubt. And so what kills me is, for years I've gone to these discussions about AI, and everybody goes, not until I see an approved drug will I believe this stuff works. For years. And it's nonsensical. If 5% of drugs that go into the clinic ever get anywhere, you'd have to run 100 years of experiments to get enough data to make such a claim. And yet, to this day, consultants, analysts feed the narrative with, well, we don't really have a drug yet. And what's even more exciting, Generate, Fiona mentioned, where we have an exciting partnership with one of our companies, with Novartis for new programs. They basically, within a span of 6 months to less, with a computationally driven model, created an alternative antibody that binds to the exact same place and in the exact same way, based on all the molecular profiling we could do, to an approved drug, except instead of that drug, it lasts 6 months instead of a month, and it's a fairly large market. We designed it, we tested it, we put it in humans, generated data within a year and a half. We had pretty clear equivalence, and now we've started a phase 3 trial. People basically goes, yeah, but that doesn't prove anything because I need the algorithm to come up with an antibody that I couldn't have come up with. Well, if you can come up with an antibody that has 5% sequence homology, and it does the exact same thing, which human can do that? If we could do that, we'd be doing it now. The reality is computers do things, I'll give you one other example of what computers can do, but people keep coming up with higher and higher questions for this. It turns out that on spike, just so we all know spike, we're all PhDs in spike protein, on spike there's a region that doesn't mutate. And the reason is, one, the virus depends on it because that's the fusogenic peptide, and if it messes with that, it just loses its ability to be transmitted. And two, therefore, the amino acid sequence are being selected, highly non-immunogenic. You can't raise antibodies against it. So how are you going to raise antibodies against a non-immunogenic part of a protein? You can adjuvant it to death. You can't raise antibodies. The computer never read the paper on immunogenic sides of a protein. So the computer generated 1,000 sequences, all of which bound right out of the gates at nanomolar, and they're better. So there are things we're learning. Bottom line, alignment is key. Your question is a good question, and it's going to be very hard to achieve.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think it's a pattern that we as humans really need to change our perspective and how we look at things and be comfortable with the new reality, which I think AI gives us. Colin, so Nubar mentioned American companies must compete with that. So for you, what's the perspective? How to compete with all this innovation, asset innovation especially, and what would you need from a perfect partner?
Yeah. So how to compete with China if you're in America? Look, it does, and maybe speaking from the perspective of one of the kind of early AI companies on the biological and clinical side. The big question and the big controversial prediction has to do with when did these computer models, when did these digital twins become so good and so predictable such that they can be relied upon and regulators start to accept them. And I don't just mean the synthetic control arm or a placebo arm, I mean the efficacy arm. Right? This will sound like crazy talk. So the consultants and experts that Nubar refers to as always doubting things, they will say, oh, this will never happen. But I do believe in the next, I would say even 3 or 5 to 10 years, we're going to start to see computer models, AI-driven computer models of human disease that are accurate enough that we start to rely on them, and they will lead to all sorts of discoveries of things we would just never come up with that will explain all sorts of connections between diseases. Don't forget, diseases are just names on the same system. So keep in mind, for those of you who are engineers who deal with computer chips, these are systems that have tens of billions of features and interconnects. And we take for granted the ability to accurately predict how one of these systems will change. And there's platforms like SPICE and other computer models we don't even talk about anymore. I think we are going to approach that reality in the next 5 to 10 years. If that happens in the US, then certainly that does become one way to stay competitive with the much faster clinical data and medicinal chemistry coming out of China. And I do think it is going to lead in the next not many number of years to drugs where we just say, well, there's just no way we could have come up with that. Similar but different than the antibody design. What happens when we now start to discover biology that leads to a completely breakthrough understanding?
Excellent. So you mentioned 5 to 10 years, which brings me back to the question which I asked before the start of the panel. So Fiona, over the next decade, what do you think, which diseases do you think we can solve as we reinvent how we discover drugs?
Well, as I trained as a neuroscientist, I'd have to put the one that I think we really need to cure is Alzheimer's disease, and the other neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's, ALS, and of course Huntington's disease. And I think we're making pretty good progress on Huntington's because we understand the genetics of that. We still don't really, we understand some of the genetics, but that's not really, even though we understand the genes in Alzheimer's, we still, like ApoE, we don't really understand its connection to the disease. So that to me seems the highest goal at the moment that would have an incredible impact, I think, on. It's not just the patients; it's the families that have to care for those. And as people get older, and especially some countries where there's more elderly people than young people, it puts a huge burden on the society to have that type of disease. So it'd have a huge societal benefit as well. And I think there's a real opportunity there because we really should be able to crack this.
Nubar, what would you wish we solve in the next decade?
Well, wish obviously you want to solve every disease. I think just to make one kind of additional, obviously the neurological cases are very, very important. I think that the technology through gene writers to solve things like sickle cell curatively are quite proximal. And I think that'll point the way to a big enough disease burden that could be dealt with technology that we would then attempt to do more of them. I also would like somehow to kind of treat measles, which obviously is going to be a rising disease, but that's a sociological disease, as you said. So, but that I think we should keep our eye. AMR is probably a good candidate for that too. I think there's a bunch of things we thought we dealt with, or at least we think it's not going to be a major issue. I'd put that high on the list of desirable things to address in the next 10 years.
Excellent. Colin, where your optimism is.
Yeah, so, and to be clear, so we as a company don't generate the data or make the drugs, so we depend on a whole series, dozens of partners from around the world that generate the very high quality multi-omic patient data, and we depend on pharmaceutical companies to actually make the drugs. We are not a drug maker, we're a key part of the ecosystem, and so for us, the diseases that let's say I'm most passionate about being solved in the next few years, I would say number one is Huntington's disease, and I think there's breakthroughs coming in the next few years. There is a root in terms of the genetics, and I think enough ways to manipulate these systems. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is pancreatic cancer. I think we're going to see a breakthrough and a new approval this year. I have some friends in that clinical trial, and our company does work with Servier, a partner, on other things there. And then third, I would say sickle cell anemia. And Nubar cited the important gene therapy, which is fantastic, but I don't think that's ever going to scale to the level of burden.
I wasn't talking about the existing ones. I was talking about
new ones. Oh, perfect.
That are much more.
So both new ones and then even small molecules. I do think we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years a cure for sickle cell anemia. I have a little bit of extra interest there since my younger sister has the disease. She's been doing okay, but we're seeing nice progress, including with some a company I'm involved with called Fulcrum Therapeutics.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this question myself, immediately it became personal, and personal stories of losing multiple close people because of the heart attacks. This would be my big optimism that we can really solve this very soon, hopefully.
Yeah. And these are diseases that do have known
Yes.
genetics, and so if we can't, after 100 years, solve these, it makes the complex diseases a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think a real breakthrough is the tools that we now have, like the long-acting siRNAs, or
Yep.
gene editing is on its way to be there, gene therapy itself. So some of these diseases, we have understood the biology for some time, but we haven't really been able to, change the biology, even though we've known what it is. That's definitely the case in sickle cell. I mean, we know pretty well exactly what's happening, but we haven't been able to change it. So I think now we actually have the tools. So when AI tells us, what we need to do, we will be able to do it. That's what I think is really something to be very hopeful for.
Fantastic, yeah. And as we're close to time, maybe my final question would be, so when we meet in Davos 2027, so tell me my one bet and then my one barrier. Colin, maybe with, when it comes, of course, to AI and drug discovery, my one bet that by 2027, we'll see this progress.
Okay. So my one bet is that we'll see a piece of biology that will blow our minds from a how did this get discovered, and it will give us a new path for intervention. I predict Huntington's will be that disease, but I'm happy to be wrong. But I do believe we will see it, and it will rapidly lead to a new drug candidate and a much higher probability of success in a phase 2 clinical trial.
Excellent. Fiona, what about you?
I think we will see compounds truly discovered by generative AI in the clinic in 2027.
Fantastic. Nabar.
I'm trying to come up with a way to end on a positive note. But what I really feel is that we'll be having the same discussion a year from now. And I think a year is such a short time frame.
Yes.
And Davos, in geopolitical terms, it's an eternity, especially the world we're living in. And so Davos thinks of a year as a really good estimation period. I think from Novartis knows exactly what it's going to do in the next 12 months, I'm sure. So very little surprise is going to kind of come out of that, except they've already made big bets. I would say more engagement. So one thing that's come up a bunch of times is that if you look, so maybe I'll say something more useful. There is this kind of interesting divide between the biotech world and the tech bio world. And what Fiona was referring to is that there's a tendency in this tech-driven bio world that bio is just another application, like, Salesforce or whatever. And so that we're just going to drive this and solve this with tech. And in fact, there's this unbelievable dream that people will make synthetic data. And of course, if we understood what was going on, we could talk about synthetic data. But since we don't understand anything that's going on, I'm not sure what the difference between synthetic data and random data really is in a lot of the things we're studying. So I would propose that we think about biotech bio. In other words, the tech in the middle. You start with the biology, human data, every piece of data, every paper that is, by the way, highly available to a whole bunch of people. That is every piece of connection. Every graph, Colin's worked and says we've worked all through graphs and other methods. You have basically everything that's ever been claimed readily available today. Bio, and then the tech doing the work in between that your brain, I would argue, it will not do and cannot do. And then ending with the bio, because the beauty in science is that the experiment allows you to validate what you predicted. People can doubt all they want, but if your data is your data, that's the accepted, for as long as the scientific method is still used, that's the accepted way to determine truth. So biotech bio is what I hope a year from now we're talking about. So tech has its right place, but it's not before bio, and it's certainly not after bio.
I like that.
Excellent, Nabar.
Like sandwich.
Well, I do hope that next year we talk, maybe in the same place as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikita.
Amazing panel, amazing panelists. Thank you to the audience. I hope you enjoyed the discussion.